Hello, hello. Welcome back.
And there we are, back again to the last live stream of this Hack 20, and we have some amazing guests today in the panel. And the panel is all about scale. The panel is all about Flutter at big scale, and we will have a great moderator today. Do you want to tell something about him, Simon?
So I'm going to butcher this, but Arnab has been really driving the project forward and actually making it all come together. So I'd like to welcome him to the screen. Arnab, where are you? There you are. Oh, there we go.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks. You didn't butcher my name. You did a pretty good job. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, all fine.
Okay. So you didn't butcher my name. It's Arnab. That's pretty well. My last name you definitely butchered. It's Ray Chaudhary. So that's what it is. And my background in terms of what's that?
Simon can't hear you.
That's weird.
Pascal, can you hear me?
I hear everything, yeah.
Okay. That's fine. I'll just keep talking. Hopefully everyone else can hear me. In terms of my background, I am an engineer. And
yeah, I'll go reattach my audio.
Okay. Technical difficulties.
Okay. Before we start, though, we just want to give a few numbers. So right now we have over 2,400 participants in this hackathon and 700 teams. And this is really, really amazing that all of you submitted so many stuff. We also have the first submissions, and we had a brief look into it. You were building great, great stuff. I expected way more retro themes, but people went into the echo part and in the echo theme way more. I did not expect that because people had way more questions there. But yeah, everything is going great and the submission is working. So let's continue with our guests here and start the panel. So should I invite the first guest in?
Let me introduce myself and talk about what this panel is about. That's cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Simon, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly fine.
All right, awesome. Cool.
We'll see after the stream, and I'll let you introduce and bring people in. Cool. We are going to continue the stream afterwards with the submission information and maybe some special guests as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Okay. So thanks for tuning in, guys. My name is Arnab. I'm an engineer. I've also worked at the Pentagon for President Obama. I'm a 3-time founder. Now I work at Very Good Ventures as a entrepreneur residence. And so, a lot of you guys are really tired and you've been looking at code all day. And so the purpose of this panel is really to get away from the technical stuff and talk about the non-technical stuff. It's really about making money. That's what we're here for, right? And we want to make money with these apps. And so we're going to talk about how we go from hackathon prototype to something that's enterprise level with millions of users. So these guests I'm about to introduce have a great background and they have different experience, and they can talk about their experience with Flutter, the hurdles they faced, and how they overcame them. And so the first person I'd like to introduce is Pooja. She works at Bounce, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be on this panel. And as Arnab mentioned, I am actually working in a startup as a senior engineer, and I'm also a Google developer expert for Flutter. So I do have some opinions on Flutter. Basically, I am a technical writer on Flutter. I write a lot about I tell people about the good things and probably also the bad things of Flutter. So maybe it's good that I'm here and I can give my opinions to everyone on what is good and bad in Flutter at mega scale. So that's me.
Awesome. And since you're the first guest, let's ask the first question. Since Mickey Mouse had Minnie Mouse, what does Dash have? Like as a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, what would be the name of this partner?
You should ask Dash that. But if we had a Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, I don't know, maybe like a Lola Dash or something. I just badder names, but yeah.
That's perfect. I like that. That's really nice. All right. The next person that I'd like to introduce is Chris Sells. He's on the Google Flutter team. Chris, hi.
Hi, all. How are you?
So could you give a quick introduction of yourself, your background?
Sure. So let's see. So my name's Chris Sells, as you mentioned, and I am a product manager on the Flutter team. One of the many jobs I get to do on the Flutter team is I deal with our top partners and customers. So I get to see all of the the big companies with the recognizable brands that people know apply Flutter both for their consumer focused apps and for their internal business to business apps. In addition to that, I also have a little side project that I'm working on. Evenings and weekends, I code Flutter myself, and I have a project I'm working on with a partner that I'm planning to ship real soon. And of course, that is all based on Flutter as well.
Amazing. Love it. And same question to you, Chris. What Dash's partner be called?
You know what? I'm going to have to leave that to Dash as well. I don't want to put Dash into a corner where he has to pick a partner based on my sensibilities. I think that we'll leave that to Dash.
Okay. All right, Dash. Dash has options, I guess. And thank you, Chris. The next person to introduce is Jarzinho. There you are. And you're still muted, so unmute yourself, please, and give yourself your 1 minute introduction of yourself.
Sure. Hi there. Sergino Henriques. I live in the Netherlands. I'm a Flutter developer at Statistics Netherlands. It is a governmental facility. Next to that, I'm a freelance developer. And when I have spare time, I'm also a GDG organizer.
Nice. And you've also got a cool side project too, right?
Yeah, I do. It's called In a Mood. And it's about I hope I don't offend any vegetarians and vegans. We actually do have it, but it's a project for ordering quality meat.
And I actually downloaded the app right before this, and so I checked out the branding. The UI looks really cool. So good job on that. And we'll talk about that throughout the panel too.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. The next person on the panel is Jorge. He's a colleague of mine. Also works at Very Good Ventures. Jorge.
Hello. Thank you for having me. As Arnab said, I work at Very Good Ventures. I get to see Arnab every day, it's fantastic. And yeah, I've been doing Flutter actually for a couple of years already. I jumped into the Flutter train back when I was working at BMW. We were tasked to think our product strategy, and Flutter check all the boxes. So I went from early adopter at BMW to scale over there to now as VGV, like a engineer. I get to work with a lot of companies, startups of all kinds to be successful in their Flutter adventure.
So you've taken a lot of different projects to mega scale, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so same question to you. You have a toucan on your shirt, so you must love birds. And what do you think his or her partner's name would be?
So there's a story for the reason why I'm wearing this t-shirt. I don't know what would be Dash's partner, to be honest, but my wife got me this t-shirt a couple of years ago because he was seeing me with all these Dashes around the office and my desk, and she was like, Dash should have a friend. So she got me this t-shirt, and this is Terry the toucan. Dash and Terry are very good friends. So
awesome. That's all I need to know. It's
yeah.
All right, cool. Awesome. Thank you, Jorge. The next person I'd like to introduce is Miguel. Miguel is from Philips. Please tell us about yourself.
First of all, thanks for having me as well. I'm from Portugal, and since almost 3 years, I've been part of the Philips U team, working on the mobile apps. I didn't have any background on mobile app development before I joined, because I joined as a Scrum Master, so not for coding. Well, actually, since 2 years ago, I got to experience Flutter, and here I am now. Yeah, thanks.
Amazing. And you're developing the apps for Philips, right? That's one of the big scalable products.
Yes.
Very cool. And you have a really cool story of how you brought that to Philips and the technology. So we'll talk about that during the panel in a second, okay? Thank you, Miguel. The next person, the last person on the panel that I'd like to introduce is Larry from eBay Motors.
Hey, how's it going, Arnab?
What's up?
Not much, just relaxing.
Father and Legend. I love that Twitter name. And on your porch in Portland, right?
Yeah, just
Very
hanging
cool.
out. It's kind of a rainy day, but it's all right.
It's always raining in Portland, right?
That's how the story goes. I mean, we have some good days, and they're really good. But yeah, just happened to be today's a rainy one, but that's okay.
The summers are spectacular there. I lived there for about a year. It's amazing there. So,
Yeah,
so
incredible.
please tell us about yourself, your background, how you got into Flutter and your eBay, things like that.
Yeah. So my name is Larry McKenzie, and I work at eBay in Portland. And I started following Flutter when it was kind of early alpha. You know, I saw the website go up after an I/O several years back, and I remember I played with it, built a little prototype, and I came into the office the next day, and I'm kind of known as a bit of a Google fanboy, and so I'm like, guys, I check this out, right? I'm showing people, and I'm like, this is going to change everything. Like as soon as this goes like full release, like just watch. And everyone's like, no, Larry, it's just no, it's nothing.
And you're right.
You know, it a couple years later continued there at eBay, and you know, I saw it's about to go 1.0, and was really excited. And I started just scheduling meetings for coworkers and stuff just to play with it.
Yeah.
And then yeah, we had a project open up, and it was like perfect for it.
So tell me about the story of how you guys went from like to building this eBay Motors app in Flutter. What went down in the team?
Yeah. So with that, right, my team that I've been working with, I've been at eBay for 5 years, and for the first almost 4, I was working on some like classified apps around the world. You might know, like Gumtree, Kijiji, you know, various brands where you can buy and sell. So one of our VPs was like, look, we want to build a Motors experience for eBay, and they kind of asked what it would take, what we could do, and I was already really excited about Flutter, and I knew it was going to be a greenfield opportunity. So from there, I was like, okay, you know, let's do a serious evaluation of it. And like I said, it had just gone 1.0, which was huge for us. Gave us great push, and you know, after looking at everything, it was like, yeah, we got to do this.
Amazing, awesome story. In terms of you know, scaling this up from you know, this initial technology to something that's as big as it is now, what like hurdles have you gone through? What have you gone through in terms of getting everyone on board with this Google technology?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, early on, like I said, we did an evaluation, and we started prototyping before we really had any product requirements of exactly where we were headed. And you know, we really, from an engineering perspective, needed to know whether we should kind of pool our resources, because we had, you know, half of our my team members were iOS engineers, half of them were Android engineers, and we'd all worked together for a good number of years already. So we knew what we were capable of. And so when we started prototyping, you know, we were blown away. And like the iOS people at first were skeptical. You know, they were, you know, and the Android people were like, sure, we'll try it. But the iOS folks were like, I don't know if this is going to be good or not. And like, I would say within 2 weeks, all of them were like 100%, we have to try this with Flutter. And that's from like no Flutter experience to just diving in.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So from there, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please continue.
Like, so from there, right? There's obvious a number of hurdles, right? We had to convince our organization then, right? And so it really came down to what was being asked of us and the timeline that we were kind of given to build an entire eBay experience, which is, you know, it's a ton of features that users expect. It's not an MVP. It's not the kind of first draft where you can kind of trial and error. There's already an experience that they expect, and we're supposed to make it a better experience for one kind of category within eBay, which was just cars and trucks. So we knew we had to do quite a lot of work, and the organization was asking if we could ship it within the same year. And so we were like, okay, we knew we'd be better off going cross-platform. Excuse me, because we could pool our resources. And we had looked at other kind of cross-platform solutions before. We'd kind of always been evaluating. So then we had a pretty good understanding of other options. And then when we went through Flutter, it really stood out there. So it really became like, okay, if you guys want this as quick as you're saying, the only way we can deliver it is with Flutter. And that was ultimately, it was a risk mitigation strategy.
Interesting. That's a cool business angle. As developers, that's a cool skill to also learn and talk to the business side of folks and mitigate that risk. It's pretty important. Let's shift gears and talk about a smaller story, starting from something that's smaller. One of the big things that companies have to do is have the product market fit. And so as you guys are hacking through your prototypes now, you need to make sure that you have overwhelming demand for your product. From there, you can kind of scale up to something like eBay Motors, something like that. So I'd love to talk about Jairzinho's story of how he's trying to find that product market fit. If you guys can bring him in, please, and talk about his story. Pascal?
Hi, guys.
You brought the whole crew.
Yep. So Jairzinho, do you mind talking about your story of how going from a prototype to something that's looking for product market fit?
So what we did is actually kind of like what Larry just said about eBay, having to have all of these experience because everyone is expecting that. So since we're a new brand, we didn't go that way. We had this this product started with another company first before I came in, and we just weren't satisfied with what they delivered. So we actually had to go very fast with replacing what was old and then put in something new. So we just decided first to have this thing called an MVP, so to say, which had like the very core thing that we needed, and that was placing an order. So our approach now is to what we did is have the website ready and then have an app. And from there on, we just grow gradually, so to say. So we did define what we need and then just drew a line of what is definitely the core minimum and then built that and released that.
Nice. That's great. That's an amazing story that you guys went through that. Pooja, you also have a story about taking your company Bounce from something. You guys are a startup that have scooters in India. It's kind of going everywhere in terms of like scooters in different places. And so I'd love to hear your story of how you guys kind of transformed from native, how you guys use Flutter to quickly create new features and pivot when you need to.
Yeah, so I guess we wanted to definitely move to Flutter, but we had a lot of like a huge user base, so we could not afford to like write it from scratch. And I think I have a similar story to Larry in a way that we wanted to we already had an experience. People were already experiencing the app; they already loved it, and we wanted to make this better without them knowing. Obviously, the technology has completely changed. So we wanted to shift to Flutter one feature at a time. So we took the approach of app to app situation where we migrated one feature at a time, and then saw the performance in of that feature in the how is the use, is there any performance issues or any kind of something like that. And then we went from that one feature to like 10 other features and slowly moved the Flutter app to the native app to Flutter. Mostly that was the reason that we did not have the business agreeing to spend time on writing it from scratch, because it's a startup and you definitely have to be very fast paced. And if you even wait for 1 month to just give an app update, I think we have lost our users right there. Exactly. So we did not have that time. So definitely, initially we had some issues with R2App, but now we have our iOS app in Flutter migrated, and our Android app, we have features in Flutter. So it's going pretty well. That's how we took the plunge and just went slowly into Flutter instead of taking the jump that okay, let's rewrite. So yeah.
Did you guys have any metrics to like kind of prove out that the customers loved what you're doing? Did you have any kind of analytics to kind of prove that stuff out?
So as I said, we had to make it in a way that the users don't notice. There is like we just wanted to make the experience better. Our design team wanted to have better animations, better UX, and that was something that was possible with Flutter easily than Android or iOS native. It took more time there. So that way, our designers were definitely happier because we could jump into these UX interactions faster than waiting for I can't do this design, I can't do this animation, and always saying no to your designers. That way, we definitely had some better improvements. I don't know how the users reacted to it, or I don't have the metrics as such, but definitely as a team, we have delivered a better app in using Flutter.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Miguel, do you have something to add in terms of your experience in the space?
How we actually started with Flutter, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about that a little bit in your introduction, but more in detail of like your team collaborating on these things. It went from iOS to Android and all those different fights that happen sometimes.
Yeah, so actually one funny note of how we started, actually it all started with a 2-day hackathon that we did. So we did one internally in the company, and then we gathered a bunch of people which had never touched or installed anything for Flutter in their Macs, and we built an app in 2 days. So we basically had to build something that would control our lighting system, so connect to a bridge where lamps are connected to and actually play with the color, brightness, all that stuff. So we actually managed to do that in 2 days. Myself and some other colleagues, we really kind of fell in love for it. So I started prototyping non-crazy on my free time. And then actually we went to the point where I was going into the office after prototyping in the evenings and then showing off, hey, I could do this with Flutter. It's actually quite awesome. And it's actually striking because I had no mobile development background when I actually started in the hackathon. So it's also a bit of a hope for people which are in this hackathon, this 2-day hackathon, trying something. It's actually freakingly easy to learn, and there's good documentation. So yeah, take me as an example. From there, so the whole process went like, you start to show working examples to people, to your colleagues, sometimes to a designer, sometimes to a manager, to a project manager, product, doesn't matter. And it starts to sink into them. You're like, oh, you can actually build this quite fast and it looks actually quite nice. And the target platform becomes an implementation detail, right? You want to do iOS, Android, it's just like, yeah, okay, some provisioning profiles here and there, but it is that, it's a detail. So at some point, we had the opportunity to actually build for a new product, a new app to control our lamps, which are communication, it's done through Bluetooth. And there came the opportunity to actually, for the business, to allow us to use Flutter. And we started with a very small team, with a very tight schedule, with a very big scope. And surprisingly, people got surprised with how much the team could actually build by the time that we actually had to put the hardware in the market. So it was kind of a very big eye-opener for the company. And then from there, we just basically started gradually to migrate everything to Flutter. All our development went from mobile, from native platforms to Flutter as much as possible. So yeah, it's quite a big journey.
Go back to your story about the hackathon. I think that's really, like, a lot of people watching want to know more about that. A lot of folks are asking about installing Flutter. That's kind of been tough. Ideating about what kind of apps to build. What problems did you go through, and how did you fix those problems when you were doing the hackathon at Philips?
So actually, it took us it's a 2-day hackathon. You have some kind of a kickoff session, right? And then it took us maybe half a morning, perhaps, just everybody trying to figure out how to get the counter app to run. But for us, it was kind of easy, the idea, because we had a specific target, right? We wanted to try a new technology with our existing products, but we just wanted to actually build the UI, build the backend, build everything that we could actually show this technology. Like you have one code base, you write it fast, it looks nice, and actually you can target 2 different platforms and you get the same look and feel, the same user experience, all of that. So for us, the idea was quite fun, quite easy. It was more kind of, there was nobody, like for this hackathon, I think the day before, there was some kind of a help session, right? Where like newcomers were being helped by experienced people to install and set up the IDE and all that stuff. We didn't have that, so it was kind of a...
But one advantage I guess you had was it was in real life, in person. So you can walk over to someone and ask them for help. It's easier. That's quite an advantage. Digitally, it's a little different. So that's a really cool story. Anyone else have you done a hackathon with Flutter? Can we talk about that?
I mean, we've done several of them at eBay. It's a great way for just engineers to take a moment and do something creative. Break away from the kind of original, and as a result, we've had a number of kind of great engineering-led features that we end up releasing. It's a great start to those things.
Yeah.
Actually, a funny story about the latest version of DevTools, which we've recently ported to Flutter. We did a hackathon, the developer tools team at Google for Flutter. And we spent a week, and a bunch of us built various kinds of things. And it's always good for the people building your framework to build real apps with the framework, right? That gives them a connection to the customer that they wouldn't normally have, because building a framework is very different from building apps in that framework. So we try to do hackathons as much as we can. In this particular case, Ben, one of the engineers on our team, built during that week the initial network tab for DevTools, and then as you saw, we eventually we just shipped that actually earlier this week. So those hackathons are pretty great, as you say, Larry, for engineering-led features, right?
That's a great story. It's amazing. Jorge, anything at BMW where you guys have done? I know you guys have participated in hackathons like Hack 19. Any stories around that that you'd like to share?
So not really around the use of Flutter. I think that one of the things that happened when we started with using Flutter was like a small team was tasked to find a framework. And once we did that, we're like working with different teams all around the world to kind of like use Flutter. But one of the things that actually helped us last year during Hack 19 was to find actually interns and people that ended up working in our team at BMW, right? Which was like, that's the ultimate like community experience, right? Like a good way to do networking, meet new people, and all of a sudden you get to work with those people like in your project, see them every day, right? Like that to me is just like a great statement for like what actually the Flutter community is, right?
Okay. In terms of improving Flutter for, let's say, the hackathons or for startups, any suggestions or ideas that you guys would want to talk through?
So to me, now that I've been able to like introduce Flutter in a lot of teams and then like in a lot of companies at VGV, one of the things that I really appreciate about Flutter is how easy testing is, right? Like there's a lot of like emphasis on the framework, and as opposed to like coming from like web background or like native development where you have to pull libraries and dependencies, like everything it's kind of like within the framework, within the SDK, and it's very visible also within the Flutter website, which like if you are just learning about Flutter, it's easy to see like how to use widgets, browse through the widget catalog, and then have access to that. There still feel like sometimes like a few quirkiness, like the analyzer could be much better. But I think that even with that, it's because like I use it and I try to squeeze every drop out of these tools that are available. But like the level of quality that we've been able to achieve with Flutter in all types of projects is just amazing. It's such a point that like it's not only about like the value that it brings to customers as a UI framework, but the value that it brings to developers. Like, don't forget that there's a metric in here that developer happiness tends to get much higher when you start using Flutter, right? So that's something to consider.
Awesome. Do you guys have other stories to also put in, Pooja?
Yeah,
Larry?
I have actually something to add. Like how he mentioned that we developers are actually pretty excited about Flutter, but as a company, that excitement is a slight different. I'll explain how. In a way, we've had issues whenever, or as I say, like I have had excitement and fear whenever there is a new Flutter version, stable version. So it's like the excitement is, as a developer, I'm like excited. What are the new things that are going to come in this stable version? But as a company, as a person who's like developing for a large scale application that's being used by like millions of users, like, okay, what is going to break now?
Yeah.
So that is like a fear and excitement together. So definitely, I think what can improve for startups in a way is that if startups are already fast paced, they should work on they already will work on technologies that are also fast paced. Now imagine if a startup is working with a technology that only takes requests once a year, then that startup is doomed. Like, they cannot actually work with such a slow company or technology. So similarly, Flutter has always tried to fulfill requests as much as possible. Like, the support team is something that can actually make and break for a startup, the support team in Flutter. And we've had a lot of help from the support team as a company. Chris has helped a lot for us as well. That's been really great. But I think maybe if we have like even more public portal where startups are a focus for Flutter. Like right now, even we have GitHub issues where the focus is on the individual. You don't know how much impactful like that solution would be for the individual. But when it's a startup, it's basically a make and break for the startup. If the support team is not good or they are not helping them, I think they're going to move into the next technology ASAP, because they have to move. They have to work on it. They have to get the MPV out. They have to get something out. So maybe support team can definitely have a little more focus on startups, rather like definitely have focus on individuals as well, but that can help startups a lot.
Jorginho has something to add to that. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, actually, I have to agree on that. It's something as well is that when you see now, when you're developing, while you're developing, you're seeing the message come in like a new version is available. You feel like, yeah, that's fine, that's great. But when you're actually on the part of doing a hotfix, and you want to fix that, you're only focusing on the hotfix, obviously, but knowing that something could break just because of that upgrade is there, and I've been there. You would like to have something more visible saying like, okay, we have an upgrade and this is what's going to be affected. There are release notes, but by the time that you just hit that Flutter upgrade because you like to do that, you're going to spend some time, fixing stuff that's been broken. You don't want to do that. That's something that's really could be improved. That's my 2 cents there.
Okay, that makes sense.
If I may add one thing, so if I look at the startup, and I think Pooja, she mentioned nicely that they really have tight schedules, very demanding timelines and so forth. So one of the things that I think that might actually hinder them, and aside from possible issues in the framework that they find or that blocks them, it's actually sometimes the ecosystem of plugins, right? So if you have a small team and you have, let's say, to build up an MVP for your shareholders, your investors, you can't be building plugins yourself, right? Yeah. It's not feasible. I'm not sure which would be like the top things that we probably miss in the ecosystem, but that could be something that there could be a right balance between how much, for instance, either Google or some and making sure that startups can actually have the top 80% of functionalities they need to build an app without caring about those details.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Makes a lot of sense.
But aside from that, just to final point on that one, aside from that, I can't imagine a better framework to actually build an app for a startup. It's like when you build something really nice, awesome, and you deploy it on multiple platforms. What else do you want?
I think one of the funny things about this idea that we're mentioning right now is like, maybe the worst thing about Flutter is not Flutter, it's the integration with Android, with iOS, right? Like it's the native side of things. That's something funny.
It's true. One area, and I think that it affects startups and big companies. But when you have a small team, you can't look at everything all the time. So Flutter is great for testing, and at eBay we've really embraced Flutter's ability to test our code, and that's something we lean on very heavily, and it has saved us countless upgrades, countless areas, and so many times. But things do slip through even at that. And one of the areas I feel like is most kind of exposed from the kind of the ecosystem is kind of crash reporting. Like Flutter doesn't really, crash in the traditional sense. And so when you're trying to capture errors, and there's various tools, and at eBay we've looked around at different providers, but ultimately the tools were built for either, or they're built for specific platforms. So it's built for Android, built for iOS, and you're always going through that plugin ecosystem, and it really gets difficult. So from like say a Crashlytics perspective, it's very hard to understand what actually went wrong and how serious it was, because almost every Flutter error is non-fatal, and within that, everything has to get converted into either a Java exception, or a different class. So there's all this mapping that has to happen, and it's very painful. So I think something that would really help startups and large companies is a great crash reporting tool.
Yeah, we've talked about that at VGV a bunch, Jorge, and so that'd be kind of cool to have. Great.
If we only had a product owner from Google in the call.
I know, right?
Oh, believe me, I'm listening. Well, the other thing too is, the Flutter team, tries to focus on the things that only it can do. Right? Absolutely. We've got, the integration, the whole stack, right? The embeddings with the specific operating systems and the engine and the framework, 350 widgets, right? The things that we are uniquely positioned to do. And what we've seen is that the places where we couldn't do all the things, that the Flutter community has just done some amazing things to step up to do that. We've got things like, Code Magic and Rive, and the recent tooling from Adobe, and things that are just not our core strengths, but that are so important to the end-to-end for Flutter. And so a crash framework that is tailored to Flutter, I think, is an excellent opportunity for enterprising third-party developer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on that note, we also have Martin on backstage, can talk about some of that stuff. Is Martin available?
Not yet. Later in the stream.
Okay, cool. How about hiring? How about hiring in Flutter? In terms of enterprise, what have you guys gone through in terms of hiring for the Flutter types of jobs?
For us, we actually did not, we did hire, but we focused a lot on, reskilling the Android and iOS developers. So we had a lot of workshops in the beginning that, this is Flutter, just these are the similarities between your Android and your iOS and Flutter. And we had them work on the Flutter code base directly. So they have idea on the Android code base and iOS code base. They have idea on the product. they have the expertise, they know the logic, they know what is actually happening. So it was easier for them to migrate to a different framework. Only thing, they just had to learn the new language. Otherwise, everything they knew, okay, how the architecture is going to be, or how they're going to how the logic is going to be. It was easier there. Otherwise, having a completely new person, giving them an idea of the entire project, and then have them come up with their way of adding it. So that way we definitely helped, and we also had some hires for Flutter. I think we had a lot of young people hires in Flutter, because it was adopted by a lot of young people than senior engineers. I think that was something that we have seen, that most senior engineers have not adopted Flutter. Like if they are like very early in their stage and they have the time and to learn a new tech framework, they did, and we could hire them. But yes, there's something that we have seen, not a lot of senior engineers in Flutter.
Gotcha. The rest of the group, I mean, how's hiring for Flutter been for you guys? Has it been difficult? Has it been easy? Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah. We haven't had to hire a lot, right? We had our original team, which was kind of converted iOS and Android engineers, and then we had a couple QA. And because we did so much automated testing, they didn't have a lot of manual things to do. They just started picking up features. But we did eventually open two positions, kind of later in our cycle last year, and I was blown away. In like 2 days, we had over 300 applicants, which is a lot of people to sift through. And so we kind of took the approach of like, okay, not all of them had Flutter experience, but they, were really interested in kind of more kind of junior entry level positions on a team. And so we kind of gave them a task of building an eBay-like experience using eBay's public APIs.
Mm-hmm.
They had to build it in Flutter, and just kind of gave a kind of long list of features they might build, and let them kind of pick and choose from there, letting them really kind of do an individual kind of hackathon experience. And one thing our thought behind it is like, well, if they don't know Flutter, maybe this will be their entry point to Flutter,
mm-hmm.
And will really kind of help kind of grow the community of Flutter engineers. And it was really helpful when doing interviews, and they come in and we could kind of gauge their excitement around Flutter and really kind of identify people who were really engaged with learning a new tool. And it was really neat to see. And it is very hard because you have so many people so fast coming in.
I'm curious, were you surprised? Did you have some samples that were like, holy cow, this is amazing?
Yeah, we had a huge variety, right? And you have people who, they have artistic tendencies, so they really kind of played with that design and did unique things there. And others who didn't really think about the design, but really kind of got into the interesting, architecture that you can do with Flutter. So it was neat to see both.
I mean, it's really cool that you guys kind of essentially had your own hackathon for hiring. I think that's really creative, and a good way to get people into it. Jorge, you had a story about this stuff too. What do you have to add?
Yeah, so one of the things that I actually realized, that especially when we started using Flutter back in 2018, right? We wanted to bring someone new to the team. First of all, we were totally newbies to Flutter, so who are we to assess Flutter skills? But the other thing is the pool of candidates, it's kind of reduced, right? So, but one of the things that is really nice about Flutter and Dart is it's relatively simple to pick and do something really advanced with just the knowledge of a very subset of APIs, right? So more than focusing on the hiring, I think we started changing the conversations in our kind of hiring practices from the typical okay, let's jump into a whiteboard, and that we realized that we were going nowhere with that, to more a conversation and interest, right? Especially for entry-level positions, and then try to assess or try to ask the candidates okay, what's a project that you are really proud of, right? And guide through their thinking process, ask questions, even imagine okay, how would we add a feature to this or that? And once they knew that we were using Flutter, they would try to learn Flutter for that, right? So we realized that actually that helped a lot, because they were kind of like showing like different skills, like thinking about like different ways of solving a certain problem, but they would use their own words, they would use their own kind of like passion and project to guide the interview. So it was kind of like the interviewee guiding the interviews or the questions and things like that. And then when I did the opposite, I was like onboarding a lot of engineers that they were like iOS or TypeScript or like Android, whatever, to jump into the Flutter code base. And at that point, what we did was to actually, one of the keys of Flutter at scale is make it boring, like making it like a little bit boring, right? Like you want your code base to look cohesive, and like it looks like it has been written by just one developer, even though you might have like how many developers in your team. So we did a lot of training also, like, okay, these are all the things that you have available in Flutter, but when you want to solve like this type of problem, the question is like, where do you write that code, right? Like, and it could go from, is it go to the backend, to the front end, to this type of component, or like, are we doing something advanced in animations? Maybe it should be some like open source package, right? And asking those questions, like at the end of the day, you have to solve the problem, but like you want to be efficient about where do you solve that problem, or how do you share that with the world? So Flutter helped us to challenge a lot of the practices that we had internally in order to kind of like restructure ourselves and be more efficient. So that's a nice story about it.
In BMW, I'm sure moving pretty quickly is what you do with your cars, but in technology, it's a different story. I've worked in automotive also. So you can't really, just like Larry's story, you can't have people that are new hires build new apps for BMW, because you'll have BMWs that are blown up or crashed into walls or whatever it is. It'll be a pretty good thing to happen. So what did you guys do around that? Any cool stories of like new features that didn't work that well, or how did you make sure that these cars were protected somehow?
Yeah, so the challenge at BMW is like it's very feature dependent on markets, right? Like the amount of features, partners, and integrations in China is totally different than the ones that you could find here in the US or like in Japan, right? Like from map providers, like a lot of things that we did initially on Flutter was actually like solving map providers, even though before like Google Maps was released. So that's why testing for us, it was so important when I was in the team. And like now I don't know how to code without test like frameworks, right? So testing to me was the key, right? Like, and being the mentality of like try to exercise your code as much as you can, put it in a set of conditions that are like replicating the real world, how the user is going to use it, and kind of like consolidate all these cases, right? So we did a lot of like work and effort, and like actually we set up like a lot of rules around like the way we were testing and what we wanted to test. And actually, like as you can see, like we open source like a lot of like testing libraries for Flutter driver, or like even like Felix, like around block and how to test that. So like our main emphasis, like I know that Flutter is all about UI and that's what the user is gonna see, but me as a lead of a project of a big size, my main concern was like, well, I know that we can make an app pretty, but can we make it robust and predictable? And the answer with Flutter was yes, we can. And that's something that we didn't get with other frameworks, or like even with native development.
Okay, that's a really good story with these hackers that are kind of making prototypes and getting to scale. It's pretty cool. You guys do that at BMW. It looks like we have questions now. Maxim is asking about the partnership with Microsoft. Chris, anything there that you want to talk about, or?
Well, certainly Windows is a very important target for us for 2 points of view. One, from a developer point of view, most or the majority of Flutter developers run Windows. They're running Windows, and they're a lot of them are targeting Android. And so, we want to make sure, and we have made sure, and we continue to make sure that Windows is a, first-class platform for our tools, right, for the Flutter SDK. And then as we push into desktop, likewise, the majority of desktop users in the world are Windows users, and we're working hard to make sure that we have the right architecture to support both a long legacy Windows and hundreds of millions of Windows devices that exist already, as well as the future of Windows, where it's going, and making sure that you can target your Flutter on Windows apps at both of those architectures, Win32 as well as UWP, which has taken us a little longer to get to alpha for Windows than I would like. On the other hand, when we get there, it's going to be pretty great. In terms of formal partnership, I would happily work with my Microsoft brothers and sisters. I was there for 8 years working on various things, including development experience for Windows 8 and working on the Visual Studio project. I would love to work closely with Microsoft on bringing Flutter in a first-class way to all of the things that they're doing.
All right, I guess another question for you. Can you trust Google with support for Flutter for a long time? Is this kind of a beta thing, or is this going to be on for quite a long time?
We are going to be supporting Flutter for a long time.
Nice.
Flutter is super important, both externally. You've seen some recent reports of more than 50,000 apps built in Flutter in the App Play Store. Some 10,000 of them, in the last month or so, and that number continues to increase. 500,000 monthly active users, 2 million unique users of Flutter since we released it in December of 2018. And of course, a large list of recognizable brands, Larry and eBay on this call, representing just one of them. So, Flutter continues to grow at just an alarming pace for us, and we're continually surprised. But internally, the growth continues as well. We have some very important projects, both that we've shipped and that we're working on, that make Flutter enormously important inside of Google. Obviously, the smart displays are one that you've seen and heard a lot about, right? The Google Assistant is, a premier, a core product for Google, and the best way to get to it is with our smart displays, and all of those apps are all written with Flutter, right? So there's just such important work that we're doing with Flutter internally that we could not get rid of it at this point if we wanted to. We are going to be supporting Flutter for the foreseeable future until robots are writing our code for us, and probably after that too. So Flutter has a long, bright history.
That's amazing to
and
hear.
Future.
Amazing to hear. We have another Googler that just joined, Andrew. We also have Martin
Andrew
from Code Magic.
Hey, Martin.
Hiya.
I guess we have another question here. Do you guys see this? Who wants to take this question? Googler, non-Googler, anybody?
Looking at that, I would say take a look at GitHub and see what the Chinese companies are doing, because it's a very common use case that they're doing. Alibaba, I think, has Fish Redux that they use for some things like this, building components that they can move in and move out very quickly. That's definitely a way of building with Flutter that they've explored a lot, that whole community.
Right. This is a good question. Just to put this out there, we actually built the whole voting site submission, everything in Flutter Web. So Flutter Web does work. Works pretty well. But other comments about Flutter Web out there?
Well, certainly Flutter Web is an important next platform for us. Obviously, Android and iOS have been in stable recommended for production for quite a while, a year and a half. Web is the platform that's coming up right behind that. It's in beta right now, and it is a high quality beta, but it is a beta. right? Not everything works. It's still pre-release. We still do not recommend it for, mission critical applications. However, we are taking quite a bit of feedback, and we've made enormous strides in stability and performance even in the last few months. So if you do have a case where you're using Flutter Web and it's not working the way you would expect it to, please post a minimum reproduction project and log the bug, and then the web team can take a look at it.
Yeah, I would add to that that one of the easiest ways to replicate something on the web is to use Dartpad. I always love it when I see Dartpad links in issue reports, because everybody can get to them and everybody knows where the code is. So if you have if it's not everything is small, but if you got a small thing that hey, this layout isn't rendering on the web correctly, it works on mobile wonderfully, but it just doesn't look right on the web, throw that code into Dartpad, make a gist for it, and include that in your issue report on GitHub. Makes it very easy for everybody to see what's going on.
So how to create 3D view like on YouTube in Flutter. Who wants to take that?
So we have had folks doing this kind of work already for Flutter, building various kinds of 3D engines. Some of them are based on lower level APIs that only certain embedders have, being able to pass textures around. That is the highest performance way to do it. But as I say, not all platforms support it. Ultimately, these are all actually amazing to watch what people have built using these various APIs at the various levels. Ultimately, I would like to see Flutter support this directly.
Any option for adding precompiled Flutter module in any of the app kind of CI/CD thing? Thanks, Rod. Martin, do you want to talk about it?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think if you're adding a Flutter module to an Android app, it could work, but with iOS, it becomes a bit more difficult just because how iOS compiles their IPA files and how Xcode handles things.
Okay. Andrew, did you want to add to that? Or
Yeah, I'm sorry for jumping in there. It's just that I worked on some stuff that might relate to this late last year. We have our add to app samples, which are in the GitHub repo. And they show two different ways to get Flutter into an application. One is to be building it from source every time. And the other is built as a separate artifact using a separate build process and then incorporated into another build process that would be for the app. So we have an Android sample that builds to an AAR that you can then roll into an existing Android project. And we have one that's building to a framework for iOS that can be rolled into an existing iOS app. And so those might be worth checking out. You can find them on the samples repo, github.com/flutter/samples.
Awesome. So which app architecture scales? Jorge's laughing. I want to hear his thoughts on this.
So everyone probably knows that there's like a type of architecture that I really enjoy, right? Like I work with Felix Angelov. He writes Flutter blog, and we are heavily invested on that. But that doesn't mean that like we just went through an evaluation and a criteria that like it was a set of kind of like constraints or rules for us. But like Redux is great, Provider is great, Riverpod is great, even just set a state, like if that works for you. I think the challenge is not the architecture, is like the level of testing, like the level of confidence of the team, right? Like if you're working on the team, like if you're coming from a web background and you've been doing successfully Redux, there's a Redux package. So it's kind of like a no-brainer to go with that, right? Yeah. That said, for me, the criteria that is very important when picking a solution, not only for architecture, but like pretty much for every plugin that I integrate in my projects, it's like something that is well documented, right? Like, or like something that the APIs are predictable, kind of like you read the method name and it does what it says. Well, that's a good that's a good point, right? And the second one is testing, right? And see how kind of like well maintained is on GitHub, right? Like if you see that the author like all of a sudden has been like missing in action for quite a while, maybe that package is not the best way to go. But if you see that they keep doing like tutorials, updating the documentation, keeping up to like the latest Dart versions, the latest Flutter versions, that's a good sign. So every option works, right? Like that's why we have so many good choices, and that's the beauty of the Android community. But then you have to be like a little bit like focus on like actually how to make your architecture scale, right? Like you could make a fantastic application just with set state, right? But at that point, maybe you need a little bit more on like testing or things like that. Or once you add like a second, third developer to your project, like you need to kind of like make sure that things remain in a good state. But it's like, I think we spend a lot of time like arguing about like state management solution and architecture and all the stuff. And sometimes it comes down to like the level of testing and the level of good practices that we put actually like small classes, like focus methods, things that they only do one thing and they do it pretty well, right? So we don't leave room for mistakes. I think that to me is the best advice that I can give without getting into technicalities about like different tools and things like that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jorge. Pooja or Andrew, do you want to talk more about that?
I just have like one thing to add, like in a way, writing a good architecture is just basically good programming. So if you are a good programmer, like he mentioned, like just having small classes, having some clean functions, so that's just basically is going to scale your application, and every architecture works. He said, like, set state can also work for you. It's just good programming. You just have to be a better programmer, and you can actually have your architecture scale. That's honestly all the arguments about architecture is just like has no sense at all. Just pick one if that works for your team, research on it, and see what works for your team, and then just do just write good code. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
I'd add communication. Wow, am I hearing echo?
We can hear you. It's fine. It's not too bad.
Okay, cool. I'd say communication. So if you pick something, doesn't matter what it is, decide why you do that and then stick to it. And then as people join the team, just go through that discussion again, just have them all, have everyone think the same thing. Because if you have someone join in and only brings in his ideas or hers, and there's no place, no one tells this person like what's been decided in the past. This person can just go one route, and just that actually mixes up what you already had before, and that's when your scaling actually like what's the right word? Fails, I guess. I guess that's it. So communication. Let's keep it at communication a lot.
Okay. Just another reminder to the audience, please ask questions. These guys are the top folks in Flutter. You can ask whatever you want. And so please ask questions. Pascal, any other questions that we have that we can kind of handle here? Does Flutter work well on low-end devices? I guess the question is how low-end? What are we talking?
Well, so the smart devices, the smart displays, some of them are like half a gigabyte of RAM, and we have to make Flutter work really well there. Now, that is both Flutter and the Flutter runtime and the apps and the operating system, and we work hard with the team building those devices to make sure we work well there. Modern day kind of smartphones are really kind of the aim for the low end, but we support Android all the way back to SDK 16, which is running on a lot of low end devices. We support iOS all the way back to 8, which again is relatively low end compared to modern iPhones. So I definitely recommend you test prototype on the lowest end devices that you plan to support to make sure that Flutter is a good fit for you. But I think you'll be pleased with the results you get.
So one thing I like to add is so I did build a hardware device, and it's really difficult. Hardware is tough. Hardware is hard. So adding software to it is a lot of work also. There was a Google project, I forget what it was called, like something IoT that you guys had way back when. Are you guys thinking about going into some like really low end devices, like Raspberry Pi type devices that Flutter could work on? I guess that's the question here. How about the future of IoT with Flutter?
Yeah, that's it's funny when you said the future of IoT. I thought you said the fuchsia of IoT, and I thought you'd built the answer right into your question there.
So I guess that's the answer right there.
Yeah. So actually, because we can target Android, you can just have a nice ARM, like a device with a nice ARM processor, and you can just target your Dart or even Flutter code, and yeah, you can have your IoT device running on that. Which, if you do it with Flutter, then you have the nice addition that you can give a front end to development teams and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But you can do a lot.
And let me just double down on that answer, which is Flutter is fundamentally, it's not meant to be a cross-platform UI toolkit. It is meant to be a portable UI graphics engine, right? Think of it as the Unity, right, for apps.
Mm-hmm.
And that core engine is what we port from operating system, device to device. And we've done it 6 times, right, across a wide variety of devices. But the idea here is that ultimately, and Tim brought this up in his keynote about ambient computing, right? That people have screens of all sizes in all places on all kinds of devices, Raspberry Pi, and the dashboard in your car, and the semi-transparent mirror that shows you your news, and all of that has to push pixels, and we want those pixels to be responsive and high performance and beautiful. And Flutter is ultimately meant to go all the places that you push pixels around. That is how it was fundamentally architected. And we see people taking Flutter to all kinds of devices, right? The long tail of embedded devices that need to push pixels around is far more than what Google can do itself.
Mm-hmm.
But it is made to be portable so that you can take Flutter anywhere you want it to go.
I like that. Well said, Chris. Okay. It looks like Jorge wants to mention something in architecture also. Or do you want to jump back in and talk about samples?
Yeah, so back on the architecture topic, just very quickly, there's a huge and awesome project by Brian Egan on GitHub. It's public, called Flutter Architecture Samples. It's the same application. It's a to-do app written with pretty much every single state management solution that is out there. And the cool thing about this project is then they use the same Flutter driver test and probably the same widget test. I'm not sure about that, but definitely the same set of Flutter driver tests to exercise all the different state management solutions. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, you can have a high performance application with any single state management solution out there. It's just a personal preference at that point sometimes. So check it out. It's amazing. Definitely I wouldn't be talking to you right now without that project. I think that's what got me started a couple years ago into Flutter, and what actually allowed me to see a lot of Flutter code and read and just break it by myself, right? So that's a perfect repo to get started with every type of state management and architecture solution.
Okay. And if you, we can also post the repo here and also in Slack, so folks can kind of follow along and learn from that too. It'd be kind of nice.
Yeah.
Utkarsh, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Is there anything I can contribute to Flutter What do you guys think?
The short answer to that is yes, absolutely. Flutter is open source, as are most of the projects that build on top of Flutter. If you go to the Flutter org on GitHub, obviously you'll find Flutter itself, the framework and the engine, as well as Andrew pointed out, there's samples up there. Our plugins are all open source. We're always looking for the website itself. Flutter.dev is open source. If you find problems there, we're always looking for contributions or, new data, new articles, new tutorials. Right? There's all kinds of ways that you can contribute to the projects that Flutter itself, the Flutter team at Google, maintains. And of course, we have contributors from all over the world, many of whom are not Google employees. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there's PubDev, right, which is this huge and growing ecosystem of packages and plugins for Flutter, where people have taken code that they have built themselves, that they then graciously not only contribute, but then maintain over time as people have issues and they want to use it for new things. So there's something like, at this point, over 10,000 Flutter compatible packages and plugins on PubDev, and I'm sure that number is low actually, because it every time I look, it's a bigger number. And then on top of that, there's all the other kind of repos and projects and tools. Device Preview and Rive and Supernova and CodeMagic and all of these amazing things that people build on top of Flutter. Earlier in the show, we were saying, wow, it'd be really great to have a Dart and Flutter optimized, crash reporting tool for Flutter. That's something we don't have great support for in the community today. Form a team, build that. Right, there's so many things that the Flutter community can use, from content to samples to blog posts to tools to packages to actual things. In Flutter itself is an endless list of places to contribute, and we want everyone to jump on in. The water's fine.
Awesome, thank you, Chris. And speaking of CodeMagic, the community is great, and Martin's here from CodeMagic and talk about what exactly is CodeMagic and how that works.
Yeah, thank you. CodeMagic is a continuous integration and delivery tool that loves Flutter, and it was built with Flutter in mind, and we target Flutter as one of our main platforms. And with CodeMagic, you can build, test, and ship your Flutter apps. And you can do everything from the UI. You can build an IPA file without having a Mac computer. So if you have Windows and you want to target iOS devices, and Windows is your preferred development environment, you can do that with CodeMagic, for example. And we really like the Flutter community. That's one of the reasons why we support different meetups and support this hackathon, and want to support you when you've finished your project, that you can continue building it on our platform. So that's why we have this freemium for the community, and also handing out credits for everybody that successfully completed their project during Hack 20.
That's very gracious of you guys to put those credits out there. So really appreciate that, Martin. So any other comments you guys want to talk about here before we wrap this up? Any other questions from the audience? Sounds like a no.
I actually had one on, Jorge made an impassioned plea for, hey, there's all kinds of wonderful state management solutions for Flutter, and that's true. And in fact, I literally just saw a new one in my inbox this morning, right? So the hits, they keep on coming. And Pooja made an excellent point, which is, good architecture is really just good software engineering. So the thoughts I'll give there is, one, architecture is more than just, state management, right? Good architecture really is good software engineering. And what I would recommend is two things. One, keep it as simple as you possibly can. The simpler it is, the easier it will be to maintain it and onboard new people. And if the requirements of your app change over time, or you're finding whatever architecture you pick, doesn't meet your needs, you can always refactor, which I'm a fan of. And then the second piece of advice I will give you is before you dive in with any particular architecture, I would recommend building a very simple prototype of your app and trying out the architecture and figuring out how that works, because it's not just the way you do state management, but it's also, are you doing deep linking, how you're doing data serialization, right? There's a number of things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to your architecture. And I would recommend, trying out a couple in, kind of, I like to, the term I've heard is seal wire, right? Build this, some simple prototype of your app that goes end to end before you commit to anything, and try out, hey, what's an architecture that serves my needs that I can then use as a solid foundation and then build the rest of my app on.
Okay, that's great advice, Chris. And on that note, thank you to all the panelists for sharing your experience, sharing your stories, and thanks to the audience for their questions. And really appreciate your time. I hope this gives you an idea of how to go from a hackathon prototype to something that's enterprise scale. And feel free to message them on Twitter. We have their names down here, and also the Slack. So we'll share that later too. And thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, how's it going, Simon?
Hello. Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
Good.
I want you to tell me how I submit my projects.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I'm not competing, everyone, but yeah, tell us how it's going.
That'd be kind of unfair because Simon's just a great hacker, so your project would be amazing.
Well, I've tried to answer everyone's questions throughout the competition in here in the background. So keep them coming, though. You know, there's still quite a bit of time to go. So stick around, and we'll let everyone know how to submit their project. We still have what, roughly 12 hours? Am I right in thinking that? It might be.
I think we have more. I think we have around.
I need to check the timer. I'm
19 hours.
19 hours. There you go.
Is, on the site, on the main site, in the dashboard, and that's GMT time. It's due at noon GMT time, Monday. So
Arnab, what do we do when before that time? That's the question. What does everyone have to do before they get to that time?
Good question. Let me show you. Okay. All right. So thanks for the sponsors again. We have the sponsor we talked about. All right. So we're submitting your project. And then once again, the deadline is 12 p.m. UTC or GMT on Monday, June 29th. So we still have about 20 hours left. So you still have plenty of time to make a quick prototype, record a video, pitch, and all those things. So don't fret, you're okay. So you go to the site. This is the first thing you do. Go into the site, click Start Hacking. And of course, you get the pop-up to sign in with your Google account. Many of you have done this. Many of you have not, but make sure you do this. Once you sign in, you should see this kind of screen. You'll see on the left side the instructions of joining the Slack channel, building your team, submitting and all that stuff, good stuff. On the right side, you'll see the stream. What's really important is the profile page. So make sure that you fill out your profile because without it, you can't really move forward. So make sure that's done. Okay, otherwise you'll see an exclamation mark here in red. So do that. You'll see that I am Snoop Dogg and my experience level is Master Jedi. So whatever you want to write here, make sure you do that. I'd actually tell you to put in real information. That's really important too. The next step is creating your team. A lot of you guys have already done this. So put in your team name, invite your team members. You'll see invitations here or created here. And we have a maximum of 5 different team members that we can have per team. Or you can have 1. You can go solo at this also. Okay, so now that we have the basics covered, let's talk about submitting a project. So this tab over here, click that, called Submit Project. What you'll actually see in the new version, we're just pushing the new update. You'll see instructions up top about what we expect on these different places. So first thing is obviously the project name. Make sure it's creative and somewhat obvious of what you're doing. So whether it's based on transportation, whether it's something about saving the world in terms of carbon emissions. So maybe call it something like carbon emission Flutter or something like that. But something that's very obvious, but be more creative than I just was. Please do that. And in terms of the topic, pick the closest one. You obviously can only select one here. So whether it's saving the world during the pandemic, or it's the retro cyberpunk future. Some of you guys have done both, but select whatever you think is more fitting to your project. So I've seen a couple of these elevator pitches. This is really important. So this is what people are going to vote on. Make sure it's very concise. Don't write a book. No one wants to read a book, especially when there's hundreds of different, different pitches out there. So make it sure you cover the problem that you're solving, why it's important, why people should give a crap, why it's really important that your solution matters. So those 3 things are really important. So I'll say it again. So make sure you are solving a real problem. Second is your solution. And third is really why people should care, why it's important that you're doing this. It should be very concise, okay? Additional information, you can maybe talk about, the technologies using, motivation, the backstory. But once again, keep this concise and put yourself in the shoes of people voting. This should be something that attracts them to your page and vote for your project. The last thing over here, the last section is the the tags. So categorize your apps. Talk about different things that are important. If you're using machine learning somehow, you type that in. If you're using computer vision, that's really cool. Put that in. If it has to do with like trees, I don't know, trees, I'll put that in there also. That'd be a good category to put in there. Make sure that your GitHub repos are public, and so that people can kind of check them out, learn from them, and also we can make sure that it's started at the right time, and also you've stopped putting your commits in at the right time also. Video, that's another really important part here. What we're expecting here is a video that is really short, something that's concise. I would say that think of a TikTok video. Think of something that's really short and that it catches attention, but explains what your project is about. So just like your pitch, you want to cover what is the problem you're solving, the solution, and why people should care. Do that, but also demo your application. Show that it's a real technology. Show that has cool UI features. Got the really cool cyberpunk features in there. That's really important too. So while you're talking about all these things, demo your app. That's really important there. The screenshots, just think of this as an app store. Just make it something that's, brings people's attention here. If it's a really cool UI, just like I mentioned, put that in there too. You have a limit of 2. Make sure the file size is not too large because, we've built this, as we're having this hackathon. So we'll have some issues if the file size is too large. Okay. So of course, make sure you ask your questions on the Hack20 Twitter. Make sure you keep asking questions in Slack. We are doing our best to cover these questions. Make sure you do that. You can also ask here. And once again, this is the deadline for submissions. Make sure that you are submitting it by 12 p.m. GMT or UTC. That's Monday. And your timer is correct. No matter what time zone you're in, no matter where you are in the world, the timer should be correct. Yeah. And finally, here's the remaining schedule for the next couple of days. We have the deadline that's coming up on Monday, June 29th at 12 GMT. And you'll get a chance to vote. Everyone needs to vote if you want to win a prize, if you want to be considered to win a prize. So make sure you vote every single one of these different rounds. So voting round 1, that will start on June 30th. And the last round of voting will be July 2nd. And what we'll do is remind you with emails. So when round 1 opens, we'll send you an email. When round 2 opens, we'll send you an email. And the final vote is super important here too. And finally, we're going to have, this date is actually wrong here. It should be July 30th. July 3rd, Friday. It will be the closing ceremony, and we'll announce the winners. We'll have some fun giveaways there too. And so make sure to tune in on that. We'll also send you an email to remind you of when that's happening. Okay. All right. So if any questions, feel free to ask on this channel. Also, you can ask on the ask on Slack. And we have Andrew coming back on.
We're gonna bring on a few people here.
Nice.
Since we have everyone around.
So we have a quick question here. Is I guess your question's around the functionality. I guess you're asking is how functional should it be if you're trying to submit your project? We realize this is a short, very short hackathon, 48 hours. We're not expecting a full-featured app that's gonna be on the App Store. Just make it simple. Make sure it somewhat works, and it's more about the concept than anything else.
We definitely expect some of the projects being UI only, some really cool animations in the retro theme, so it's absolutely fun.
I have to say, I'm backstage here. I've been looking at what's been going on behind the scenes, and I just saw a tweet 25 minutes ago. Someone has remade Google from 1998. Then the Google home screen, they've actually remade that. You can Google search and all that kind of stuff. It's a web page. It's pretty.
That is pretty cool.
There's also, it's kind of curious. There's also people that are actually Twitch live streaming their coding sessions as well, which is that's kind of cool. Over the last few days, we've had a sneak peek at some of what's been going on around, and I tell you what, we're really impressed. We can't wait to see all the final submissions come in. So the other key point here, of course, is it doesn't matter if you don't finish. If it's not perfect, submit something. It's better than to submit something than not submit anything. because that can lead on to making a full product, to taking this further. So submit something at least.
Okay. And especially a shout out to all the streamers on Twitch. I watched some of them, and it was really impressive to see a whole team on Zoom streaming their progress on Twitch and discussing things like merge conflicts and how to solve them. And it was really cool to watch them doing their progress on the hack.
We've got another question here. Let's bring that up. What is more important, concept, features, or UI? To be honest, they're all equally important. I think the pitch, honestly, what Anna was saying just in the submission, the pitch is very important because that's the first thing that people are going to see. If it looks great, they will look further, and then that's when they can look at what features you have, maybe look at your code, and that will inform their decision about how they're going to vote.
One thing is also that think about what you would vote for. Put yourself in the shoes of the voter, so you can make the decision yourself, really.
Do submissions have to solve an existing world problem? That is what you mentioned when talking about the pitch.
No. If you build a cool UI in the retro theme, it doesn't solve any problem.
I was gonna say, if I could solve an existing world problem in 2 days, I mean, kind of all problems, right?
What are we doing wrong?
Right? What was that line from Silicon Valley? You know, we all tried to change the world with programming. Yeah,
I guess more of that is having a really cool UI is a problem that maybe it's not really a problem to like world peace, but it's something that people want to see. So yeah, we're not solving world peace here.
I can bring my 2 cents there. Before being a developer, I was a designer, and I would say like just the design. I would say more the user experience, because you can have this amazing, beautiful design, but if it's not useful, if it takes 5 clicks to take to an option or whatever, it's not a good user experience. The single fact why the iPad weren't so popular to so many people, even people who never touched a computer before, is because you only have one button, which is the home button, which now it doesn't exist anymore, but because already people know it.
0 buttons.
But yes, but that was the reason why it was so simple. It's just you tap an icon, you tap the home, that's it. Everyone can use it, grandma can use it, kids can use it. That was a good user experience. So if your app has a good user experience, it's like one of the good tasks that I do is I finish an app, I don't say anything else. I go to my uncle who's like 72 years old and I say, use it. I'm not going to tell you one word of how the app is, how it works. Just use it. And if you reach what I wanted to him to reach in a short period of time, that means that I did a good user experience. If it takes like 20, 30 minutes, then I did something wrong.
I mean, a great example of this is you just reminded me recently, like using Zoom on mobile is just not the great
nightmare. Yeah.
It's that simple thing of swiping right to reveal everyone. I mean, like it's non-obvious. Like those like long press actions, other things are all secondary power user features. Don't put the measure parameter interface.
That's bad.
Other good tip for UI is if the user don't see it, it doesn't exist. So that's why a lot of people don't use the hamburger menu kind of so much, because they don't know that all the options that are there. And if you don't tap that button ever, maybe one of your cool features will never be discovered. So if you got like key features, use the button navigator, because the button navigator has your main features that you really want the user to see and to tap on it and to go through. So if you really have something key, show it to the user in an easy way. Don't hide it.
I've got a question actually for Andrew.
I'm actually going to run off, guys. It's been amazing.
Nice to have you here.
Pleasure.
Thank you for hosting
so much.
Projects. See you guys later.
Thanks.
So, Andrew.
Yes.
I have a question for you. It's a really simple one. Are we ever going to get, should we say, first level audio support in Flutter?
Oh goodness.
Because I know it's going to be a perfect answer.
Let me think and disconnects from the chat. Yeah.
So many people are just asking me this weekend about audio. What do I do for audio? How do I stream audio? And it's like video. You have video player as a primary plugin. I'm thinking there's a really good option there. Just even if you can just play some samples like button click sounds and other things. If it is this kind of game engine, sound is a primary, thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Chris, unfortunately, you missed your window because Chris is not only the product guy for us, but he specializes in the ecosystem, so he knows this better than I do. I have not heard anything from the team about doing either engaging more with one of the plugins that have already been created, or about doing a first-party plugin for audio. And so this might be something that maybe several people from the community who feel the way that you do, Simon, could rally around and go, take a look at the plugins that are out there and say, all right, we're going to come in and invest our time in making one of these better. We had the question earlier about how do I contribute to Flutter? There's nothing. I know you use the term first party, which we're trying to dial down a little bit. Like when you talk to, and I don't mean that as a criticism of you, but like I remember a while back, Ian Hickson, the tech lead for Flutter, went through all the docs. And he was like, we are not going to use the words internal and external anymore when talking about people. Because originally they had used those terms. Like people who worked at Google were internal to the Flutter project, and people who did not work at Google were external to the Flutter project. And he was like, we need to make sure that somebody who doesn't work at Google is just as much a member of the Flutter team as somebody who does work at Google. And so I think this is one of those problems that's probably going to continue to be solved by people who don't happen to work at Google, but are very important contributors to Flutter.
So talking about which, I'll announce something here. So a group of us have got together inside the community and have started a 3D working group. So we're going to be working towards bringing 3D to Flutter. I shared a little snippet of that yesterday on the live coding, which was I actually have 3D models fully textured, all rendered first party in Flutter. So it renders all the triangles with Flutter. There's no OpenGL, doesn't do it externally. It's all done with Flutter, very performant. So our aim is to bring 3D into the realm of Flutter with that.
So wait, well, I'm now curious. You've piqued my curiosity here.
It's really good.
First of all, can we have two quick questions about the
answer some questions?
Simon, can every team member vote or only the leader?
Every team member votes. Voting is done on participants, not on teams.
All right, and next one. Is there a character limit for the pitch?
I don't remember.
I don't think so, but you should definitely not try to hit it.
There is I've got the limits now. 140 characters on the tags, 500 characters on the extra information, and 140 on the elevator pitch. So the idea is it's like tweet sort of size, for your initial pitch. Additional information, 500 characters is a lot larger. We've put limits on them mainly because you just don't. No one's going to read like that TLDR. When you get the email, which is just like 10 paragraphs, you're like, I don't have time to read this. Just one sentence to tell me exactly what you want from me. I will answer it. So keep it to the point. I did actually see a question here, which we could answer. I thought this was kind of a good one. How can a button the shape of an arc or a circle made up of buttons? So I think Mariona could probably have a go at this.
I have been having nightmares with those stuff. Well, custom clippers and painter, that's the things you really need to achieve. You make sure that when you start creating your path, you will start creating your curves. So you will have to use a little bit of math, the good old math. So you got your cubics and your relative cubics and all the things necessary, depending on what you want to do specifically, because in some cases, you can achieve only by putting a circle with a certain offset and you achieve the same goal without any math even whatsoever. But if you really wanted to push into really performance, you can use just custom clipper, and that'll be examples around the web. There is so many. Even if you search like custom corner banners, like plenty of. I wanted to achieve one cool UI, and I just Google it, and it was the example right there on Stack Overflow. So I would say that's the first way that you can start. If you don't, Medium also a great source of knowledge of how to do it with a custom clipper or painter.
I did actually have just a thought about this. There's always something that's always overlooked by people is custom multi-child layout, right? So that lets you control where the positions of all your children are, right? So if you want to, if you truly want to like position something in a circle, then you can just use cosine and sine to get the position in the rectangle for your sort of little layout function that's inside your custom multi-child layout, and then you just position all your buttons in the circle. Should be straightforward. And quite high performant, no custom painter needed. But that all depends on your use case, right? So that's going to be widget level, and animations maybe not so good in performance there.
Yeah, even if you search how the circle progress bars are done, you can start from there and just replace maybe your points with buttons and stuff, and get a better result. And then maybe try to drag and see if they can just move in circles. There's many options. Start from the basic and then start changing small details until you feel comfortable with the painter and the clipper, and then you can move forward.
I have one question I really want to answer, and this is that the performance on iOS is not up to the mark of the on Android, although the code base and having the same code base is pretty cool. And this is kind of true. So first of all, the performance on iOS is great. It's fantastic. But there's one tiny bug, and I recently made a pull request to fix that, and I quickly want to show you, and maybe this answers the question. So if you're having a list, there is actually a bug which increases the damping while you're scrolling. So you cannot scroll that far with a fling compared to the native iOS bug. And so I created a pull request, and we are currently discussing how to solve this. So yes, there is actually a scrolling bug in iOS, but it's solvable.
The other thing to mention about this is also whenever you see these commits or these bugs, you can patch this is something I'm not sure if I should recommend for all new developers, but if you're feeling comfortable with Flutter now, and you can always pull in these commits into your local Git repository, start a different branch, and you can check these out, see if they solve your problem. Then you can go back to the PR and say it solves it for me, and what your Flutter version is, and all this other information to help. I mean, it's an open source project. If you have this problem,
and also you have the full SDK and the full source code on your machine, so you can go in. It's a Git repository. You can change something, you can adjust it, and most of the time it's just a few lines of code. Create a pull request, and everyone can benefit from it.
And then write 10 tests.
Yeah, after Hixie mentioned it.
we were actually talking about this just the other day. We were wondering if we should put instructions on either flutter.dev or the GitHub wiki about how to cherry pick changes into your local Flutter. And we were debating whether that was a good idea, because it's not that hard to do, but it is something that you can get into a weird state. And we're like, it's sort of like if your car came with a manual for how to disassemble the engine, maybe some people could put that to good use, but it's also like, So we had a little debate.
Simon, you had a question earlier about that, about the download size of the Flutter. If you have,
yeah. So we've been trying to solve it, and there's several community solutions for this. Is when you're switching branches, right? There's a lot of times that you want to develop on dev. So a lot of the cases that I see is you develop on dev, knowing that the time you release 3 months later, that dev version that you're developing against is probably going to be production ready. So it's kind of like you work on the near the bleeding edge, not master, but then eventually it'll make its way back down to you. And there are solutions like this one that's been shown on screen, FVM, which is Flutter Version Manager, I think it stands for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's not perfect, but I do wonder if there is a simple solution, which is just to cache the downloads. I'm not saying make separate cache folders. We know there's been issue tickets around that. It's really complicated. But just caching the download process, because having to, as soon as you switch branches, to download all of those artifacts, it does really not just kill bandwidth, kill performance, it kills dev time. And that hot reload, hot restart thing just goes straight out the window when you have to wait 10 minutes for 300 megabytes of download to come down. So just some feedback. Not really a question.
Great an issue, Simon.
Thank you.
Yeah, write an issue for that, right?
You could file an issue for it.
So you're curious about what I was working on, so I can share my screen here. There you go. So there's some glitches there at the moment. It's not perfect yet, but that's running on web. Sorry, that's running on Windows. This is on the Windows host, and that is all native. There's no, if I let's say I'll turn off the colors. Yeah, we'll just turn off the colors. That's right. There's I was working on lighting. Yep, that's wrong. There we go. So yeah, that's actually a 3D model that's been loaded from assets. It's it's not very pretty, but that's what it looks like when it's in memory. And then we pass it and display it. But this is all done directly with Canvas, and the magical Canvas API, if I find it, is that line there. Wants to have a play around. Draw vertices. It draws 2D triangles. So what we're doing is we take our 3D model space, project it to 2D, and then take the 2D triangles and just render them on the screen in the correct drawing order. So yeah, and it's super performant. I was getting, I think it was 65,000 vertices at 60 FPS.
Yes, the first test you did was that amount of vertices. Yeah. And not only that, the 3D model, the screen is not a 3D model. Just could you mention a little bit of what is going on the screen that is actually functional?
So what? I went over this in yesterday's stream. I don't want to like sort of go over it, but Andrew, if you want to check out the other streams, we showed Pac-Man running. So I've actually got Z80 emulated running the original Pac-Man ROM in the original arcade machine.
Because that's what you do.
So
yeah, Mariano, do you have it working in CodePen yet? You got this?
We discussed a lot about that.
I have Pac-Man emulated running it in web, and it can run in CodePen. So yeah, there you go. So stuff is coming. Right? There's always stuff that the community is just playing around with. But at the moment, this is ridiculously small. I mean, I have the importer is less than 200 lines, and then the example, which uses the importer and the engine, is 230 lines. And this is the ridiculous thing that good and bad thing that I love about Flutter in terms of like it's just so simple and easy to do these powerful things, right? So yeah, there you go.
And so are you doing all this in a
go for it.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask if this is something gonna land in the framework, or it's gonna be like just packages people can use.
It's all just packaged. This is nothing to do with the framework. This is all just third party, I guess. We can start using those terms. This is going to be third party. However, we probably we were looking at this. Obviously, still needs to be spoken about to the actual Flutter team. But we've been looking at that little solutions to increase performance and a few other things that we could probably do just to bring this to the next level. And I think that once there is a stable solution, so this is totally off topic. I mean, do you want to talk about this? We can talk about this. I mean, this is the end of the stream. I mean, if anyone wants to still listen, sure, why not? So the working group, we've been talking about WebGL, right? Because Dart supports WebGL on web, right? It does not support it on Android or iOS. So we've had curious thoughts about can we get away with doing kind of a immutable texture interface where we can actually get WebGL running on all platforms. So because that's a standard interface and it's meant for JavaScript, which is a very similar in terms of syntax and applicability to Dart. So I think the hope is to try and get WebGL working across the board, and that becomes a standard that can be sort of rallied behind. So anything that you currently use with WebGL and JavaScript can then be brought into Flutter that will work on web, embedded, and obviously iOS and Android then. So I think it's a really powerful sort of solution. There's lots of engines that are already using WebGL out there at the moment. So, be a good solution, good option. This at the moment would not, the way that we're doing this rendering right now is probably not powerful enough to do WebGL completely. So we've been looking at a different route for that. Once we get it spec'd out properly, then we'll probably take it to the next step, and then we'll ask for feedback from community, get some opinions, get some stuff going, and then take it to the next level and actually start doing a first implementation. And then we'll do some sort of formal route. So we'll actually have some way of everyone reporting stuff. We'll be at a GitHub project.
Cool.
There you go. Go on, Andrew. Were you curious about how this has been done?
Oh yeah. That's engineer brain. I want to take it apart, even though I can't actually get to the code. I'm just looking at the stream like everybody else.
So I won't go to too much detail because I'm terrible for that apparently. But basically, we load the asset, and that gives us a in-memory representation of the object, which is just, if I skip down to it, I'll make it bigger. One of these. So it's just a series of vertices, normals, textures, and colors and indices.
Mm-hmm.
These are like the things that build up your two-dimensional object. Now, this is not limited to just displaying one object. You can display as many as you like in a 3D world. That's not part of it, But this is just to run this demonstration. And at the moment, I just create a ticker and have it rotate a value just to paint it on the screen. But this is just a custom painter, and the custom painter passes over the object items into this mesh. And mesh, it has this one method, which is the magical method. It's called project. Let me format that so it's easy and make it larger. So this just does a perspective transform on all of the three-dimensional vertices. So we get to all the vector threes. So if we're doing a rotation or for changing the camera, the end result is you've got multiple matrices being multiplied together into a final transformation that you apply to your vertices to get them into the final positions. So that's what we're applying here. You can also apply that to the normals you get from the model for lighting. We won't get to there right now. This is just bounds checking for some other stuff. And right now, if I comment this out, live coding. That's it says, yeah. That's. Hang on. Well, we're done. That's completely wrong. Right. There you go. So that's showing you the back faces. That is the faces that are facing the opposite way, now facing towards the camera being painted. So that's where you see the dark bits on the edges, right? So we do back face culling here, which is removing the triangles that are facing away from the camera, not facing towards the camera. And then we just simply sort them at the moment by what's called the centroid, which is the three-dimensional center, the point in the center of the three-dimensional triangle. So imagine a triangle with three-dimensional space can be in any axis. The very center point of that three-dimensional triangle. So this is the average of all three vertices. And we just take the Z point of that and use that as our sorting order to solve what's called the painter's algorithm, which is when you paint back basically from the back to the front. So that's simply the same way that Flutter draws on the. No, it's the same way Flutter draws on the screen, right? You paint all the backgrounds and then you paint all the text and on top. That way you don't get borders around your text and so on. And then we convert the UV coordinates from negative coordinate space to positive coordinate space. That's just about the fact that OpenGL and other graphical systems work at 0, 0 on the bottom left, whereas Flutter uses 0, 0 and other UI systems use 0, 0 on the top left. Right?
Top left. Yeah.
So it just inverts it basically. And then once we've mapped it, we're just taking the XY coordinate and storing that in an offset, which is standard two-dimensional Flutter stuff. We'll ignore colors for a minute, and it returns this object, which is part of the Flutter engine UI vertices. And this supports several modes of drawing. In this case, it's triangles, triangle strip, and triangle fan. These are also beneficial for doing polygon work, which solves a little bit of the glitches we have here on the screen once I solved that. But anyway, the point here is you take that object, and then all you have to do is take that one object and then put it to draw vertices, and it'll draw it on the screen. I know it makes it sound. Yeah, it took a while to get to this. Don't get me wrong. To understand.
So when can I play Counter-Strike 1.6 with it?
Oh no, we only can support 1.3. We don't go up to 1.6.
Yeah, when are you going to get the source engine ported over?
Yes.
I know, right? That'll be the next question. Anyway,
but will it run Doom? Oh, that's a question.
So actually, that's
actually possible.
I'll be honest with you. That would probably be our first idea of making a sort of an expectation of not like a target, right? You need something to aim for. Like, let's get Doom working on Flutter is a great example of trying to take something that is open source that we can then say, let's get it working. And Doom is one of those kind of like standard things that you want to get working.
That'll be
on
awesome.
everything.
Yep.
So yeah, why not? Yeah,
you got to send me a link to that when that's published, because I'll share it around. That's pretty intense.
I was trying to literally. I'd started this it was on the week. This is a weekend. This is a couple of days, and it was working on it. It was just when Pac-Man 40th anniversary was a few weeks back. I can't remember, a month ago now. I don't know. I've lost track. So it didn't get released in time for that, but I definitely will release it. So, yeah.
Cool.
Andrew, what are the latest news in Dartpad?
Yes.
Or have you switched over to CodePen?
Yeah, no. So
I need to know those things.
Yeah. The latest news at Dartpad is the null safety Dartpad that we released. Nullsafety.dartpad.dev. That was something I worked on over the past few months to make sure that was in good shape. And that's eventually, as null safety progresses, that site will sort of cease to exist. It'll get a redirect into the main Dartpad, and we'll land null safety in the regular Dartpad. But making sure people had a convenient place to play with null safety and some quick sort of snippets to go through and learn the basic concepts, that was really important to us. That's been something I've been working on with Dartpad.
I tell you what I've been curious about is the migration plan. And I don't think you've released anything yet, but I have been noticing this in the repo, the comments with the exclamation marks and the question marks into I'm guessing that's part of the migration process.
There's Dart, recently went through a big, well, not recently, not too recently, about 2 years ago, we had strong mode for Dart 2.0. And that was a big migration for a lot of people. Like suddenly had all these typing restrictions and things like that you had to deal with. And the team learned from that, watching people migrate their code, both internally, at Google and outside of Google. They learned from that experience. And so we're going to have some tooling to help people get over that hump, to do a lot of auto conversions as much as possible. And we also, in the roadmap, there's going to be a moment where the team says, okay, we are 99% sure that all this is good. We're ready for people to really migrate. So please start migrating now. And then by the time you're done, we will have reached stable and we can all sort of go out together. There's going to be a very big push to try and help the community do this giant project, which is migrating all this code to null safety. So it's definitely something we've been thinking a lot about, and how to make it as easy as possible.
Is it clear when the Flutter repository will be migrated?
They're working on it right now. That's all I know. It's a big migration project, right, Maggie? Getting all those packages. What? So.
Okay, have we got any more questions coming in?
I haven't seen any, but I haven't checked Twitter yet.
Okay, have a quick check.
I think we had a question related to a previous one. If it was a custom render object instead of a custom pane.
This one here?
And yeah. You're used to render objects, Simon.
Well, I can talk about render objects, sure. I mean, so a custom paint is a render object, and when it gets to its paint part of the render object, it just goes back to your delegate that you're passing to do the painting. The problem is, if you then want to deal with touch, then you have to do a separate widget that deals with touch, like gesture detector. And then I go, well, I want to do with layout. I want to have some child widgets I want to move around. Well, now I've got my custom paint, I've got touch, and now I want to deal with child widgets. Now I have to change those around. You're suddenly making a full widget, right? So the point here is, it's a bit like if you're using a container and you use and you're only using one of the parameters of container, like a line. So sorry, you're using like a container with alignment of center. We use a center widget instead. It's more direct. If you're using a container with padding, you use a padding widget instead, because you're only using one option of container. The same goes for the switch between sort of a custom render object or a custom paint, in terms of, if you just need the painting, sure, custom paint. But then if you're trying to do stuff more advanced, then that's where you go down sort of the route of doing a custom render object. And it is a lot more boilerplate, because you're lower level of the system. So there's a lot more manipulation and handing around of objects, making sure you're working, because a render object remains when you do a hot reload and a hot restart. it's cached by the framework. So you have to understand it's a different way of doing stuff than the widget layer. Okay, that's what I'd say about that. I'll go on for hours otherwise.
Cool.
Well, actually, on that, I might check with you guys one thing. I do find myself building render objects, but more for slivers, or render slivers, because I find some missing stuff in the framework, right?
Yes.
And I wonder how you guys, because you also build a lot of stuff with UI and you want to make some really cool scrolling experience for the users. Do you also have to go that route, or you manage some other way?
So I'll give you some interesting things. So simple approach to doing custom scroll behavior can just be listening to a scroll controller, right? And because I mean, I just want to cover this for the audience, right?
Yep.
Like a scroll controller is a listenable, which means you can put your scroll controller in an animated builder, and it'll rebuild the widgets when you scroll. Now you can, in that side, that little builder method, you can put like a translate, and now you've got parallax scrolling, or you can add scale, and now things scale as it comes to the screen, and you can do all these nice effects. However,
if you check my, sorry, go.
I was going to say it's heavy on you're building a lot of widgets then, and if you change the tree dramatically, you're going to stutter probably. You're doing a lot more work, right? Go on.
I did a lot of those examples in my Spotify, which people think that I convert a column into a row, and what actually I did is I put a stack, but the one on the top, it actually has a padding, and the one on the bottom has an animated padding, which when you reach a threshold where you scroll, I only switch from bottom left to top bottom right, and it feels like it's converting from a column to a row, and I'm actually making an illusion for the user, and it looks legit. And I also trying to use it like a collapsing toolbar, which is actually only decreasing with a percentage. I put a power, an exponential one. So it doesn't do it at the very beginning. It delays a little bit, like if it was a curve. And then it triggers the end result. And it looks just like Spotify.
I was going to say, I've done a couple of transitions, and by just using the exponential curves coming in and going out, you can suddenly get this really nice switching animation between widgets, or transition between widgets. Nice little trick. But sorry, Miguel, your point was slivers, render slivers. It's kind of one of the very first things I spoke about with some people was that Flutter doesn't limit you to one coordinate system, right? So what I mean, they called it a layout protocol in the framework docs, but basically you have render box, you have render sliver, but it's all based on render objects, and render objects don't care, like constraints, the actual bottom constraints, I think, is just a blank abstract class, if I remember rightly. There's box constraints and there's render constraints. So if you wanted any to the audience, if they want to play around with like polar coordinates or use longitude latitudes to position your widgets, you can try that out and do that if you're that technically minded, and you can go down that route. It's very complicated, right? However, this is the problem, right? Because everyone's used this box model. When it comes to slivers, it's really complicated, and then like the nature of the way slivers behave and work is something that is very hard to get your head around. Very, very hard. So
one problem I faced is within a list, if you have a list item, you want to center something in a dynamically hide list item, you have to go with a custom render object, similar to list tile, which is also a custom render object because it has to position the avatar at the right position.
There are options, but I think for going down to some of the more complex scrolling behaviors, it is end up making custom render slivers, definitely. We haven't seen much out there at the moment because it's a difficult topic to explain. There's a lot of fundamentals you need to understand render slivers, and it's nothing you can do in an hour. Definitely not. So it's going to take time.
The kind of stuff that
it filters down. When it filters down, I think we'll get to the point where there's a lot more context and information out there for render slivers.
I can go with this one. I want to make it like a Udemy, and how I implement the video feature. To be honest, if you're using Flutter Web, it's really simple. Use the video element, and that's pretty much it. You'll create a list like you do in any single app. I would say that depending how you're going to host your videos is a trigger thing, and how you're going to scale this into an app that doesn't get you poor in a few days because of the usage of the videos. If you have an AWS, or you just use an embed on unlisted videos on YouTube. depending how you go. I will go always as go to an unlisted YouTube video, embed that video, and you'll save a lot of money. And then if it becomes profitable, something like that, go to your own video. And video controllers with the video element is super simple. Going like pause, advance, forward. All controls are super simple to use if you're using on a full Flutter web kind of logic, some like Udemy.
There is something to be said though, also that video has always been hard on mobile, and it's not like you have this massive powerful system. I can spin up 100 videos and expect them all just to work. And like video itself is a very expensive operation to perform, streaming especially. So do take that in mind. You know, be careful on what you're doing.
I would say that the good thing is it's something similar experience of YouTube. You only have one video running at a time. So always use, if you have a playlist, do not preload or do anything in your playlist. Just have thumbnails, the small little thumbnails with the descriptions and stuff. And you can go through that video and update the source in your video, in your main video, if you have like a playlist and a scrolling list, and for the user to not jump back and keep looking for different videos. There's a lot of different logics, but I can help if you want to reach on Twitter and stuff.
There is actually a nice little feature of Video Player. Well, the way Video Player works is you can start one controller, prepare the next controller, and when it's ready, you can then hand that controller off to the current video player and instantly switch videos for you. So
yeah, even Exoplayer has a lot of features for doing playlists and stuff. I've been using it for a lot, video streaming, for playlists and videos. I even went before the issues with Facebook. I created a small app which was a topic-based centric related to your fan pages on Facebook. So you fan page someone on Facebook, could be, I don't know, the Smosh, could be any kind of topic. And I fetch all the videos and I put the categories on each videos, and you will be fetched on a daily on your videos from your best categories. But then all the issue from privacy happened, and now you cannot access API. So it's a boomer, but I did it all that with the Exoplayer, and Exoplayer is part of the video player plugin on an Android. So that's one thing that you get it. And on the web, it's been used so many times. So take the same logic as JavaScript. I'm pretty sure there's tons of examples on the web, and it will be easy to implement on Flutter Web.
Thank you, Mariano. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Andrew. And I really like to close here. And for all the hackers there, please make sure that you submit your project. Please make sure that you start recording your video on time. Don't make it a last-minute video. It's very important. You have 18 hours left. And yeah, good luck with the challenge.
And as I said before, even if you feel like you're not ready, submit something. You're better off submitting something than nothing.
Yes.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.